back in again. But hopefully spring won't last forever, right? And it just seems to be when that's the worst of it, is this time of year. So, Brother Randy, you have some friends. Would you want to introduce them?
Yes, sir. It's Chris Swan and his wife Vanessa and his favorite Elliot. But Chris was with me the whole time. He's from Knoxville, lived in Scott County, but I made him in Texas.
Okay.
He was there the whole time with me. He come to visit with me for a week, so we wanted to come out and visit.
Yeah, is he the one? Are you the one from New Orleans?
Yeah. Well, not from New Orleans, Lake Charles.
Lake Charles. So did you grow up in Lake Charles?
No, I grew up originally in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay, I was going to ask you if you knew any Boudreaux jokes. Yeah, I don't know if anybody.
I know last name Boudreaux.
Yeah, well, down there instead of telling redneck jokes, it's always Boudreaux. You know, Boudreaux did this or Boudreaux did that. That's their equivalent of redneck. You know, I enjoyed Louisiana. It's almost its own little culture. You know, it's extremely. And St. Charles is probably the same way because they don't have towns, they have parishes, and it just shows you how much of the how much influence that the Spanish had on that, or the French, I guess, had on that area, you know, with Catholicism and Mardi Gras. It's they make a cake every Mardi Gras, and inside the cake is a little plastic baby, which I don't even know how that passes the FDA, because you could swallow the baby. But the idea is and it's called a king cake. Anybody ever here had a king cake? Have you had it? You spent some time in New Orleans? You went down there for Mardi Gras, didn't you? Well, that's the only time of the year that they sell that king cake. But it's all different colors. And they put this little plastic baby in there, and if you get the baby, then you have to buy the king cake next. It's silly, but it's part of their culture, you know. But I enjoy. Nice having you here with us. And you were out at Roth with Randy. Okay. Well, I always need sermon illustrations, so if you want to write down some stories for me about Randy, that'd be great.
He's got plenty. I got plenty.
And who's the little one?
This is our daughter, Elia.
Okay. What'd she say?
She loves to sing.
Okay, amen. All right. Well, she doesn't want to hear me sing, that's for sure. All right, do we have any prayer requests tonight? Yeah. Oh, are you just moving your hair? Yeah, don't go to an auction, Beth. You just bought it. Any prayer request over here? Went and saw Scott yesterday. Leanne is home. Has 2 weeks. I didn't realize this, but when they went in and they made a mistake and they cut the wrong place, I mean, it was a real big deal. You know, I mean, the surgery should have only been an hour and a half, and it ended up being 8 hours. You know, and it was not. I mean, Scott was telling me yesterday, the doctor comes out and told Scott, "You need to sit down." Scott said, "I don't want to sit down." He said, "You need to sit down." He says, "I mean, you know, your wife's just going in for something that's fairly routine, and then you get that, and you're like." So finally, he sat down, and the doctor told him, "Hey, you know, this went south in there, and we cut the wrong place, but they fixed it. It's just he told me last night, it's a real crucial time there that for 2 weeks of healing that is really, really important." And, you know, in fact, he told him at first, he said, "You know, we're not totally sure we can fix that," you know, which is not what you want to hear. But so then then his daughter Mackenzie went in yesterday and had a procedure done because she miscarried, and she came home yesterday, so she's home, and the funeral for his brother's tomorrow. So that was just a lot of weight on one family. We took him over a basket, but I've got his address if you want to run by and see him or call him. I'm sure he'd appreciate that. You know, a lot of load on one person. You know, and that's, you know, even if you don't even really know him all that good, it's just it just goes a long ways for somebody at church to just reach out to him and let him know we're praying for him. And I'm sure that the funeral stuff's in the newspaper. You can find it. You get a chance to go and see him tomorrow. But Any other prayer requests tonight? Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Wow. Okay. Okay. If you're communicating with him, let him know that if he's got to go and he needs help with his ministry there, just tell him to give me a call. Okay. I mean, maybe the reason why he didn't go home is because he's got responsibilities, but let him know if there's anything I can do to help him there. Yeah. Well, one thing's for sure, if this whole good evil thing is real, the devil doesn't want people saved, right? And especially when you're in a place like that, there's 1,000 quitting points. You can wake up many moments and go, "What in the world? I'm going home," So we'll certainly pray for him. That's for sure. So tomorrow, I'm flying up to Pittsburgh, just for tomorrow, and then Friday morning I'm flying right back again. So I'm going to leave here, start driving out at 1:30. So if any of you late guys are up and you don't mind me calling, so I'll stay awake and let me know afterwards. But so I got to drive to Nashville. Then I'm going to fly out there, and I'm only going to be on Thursday. I'm going to fly back Friday. But just have a chance. There's somebody that we were in. I was their pastor before. Is getting ready to get married, and it's neat because you think you see somebody get saved, and you mentor them, and then you got to leave, right? And then you often wonder who grows and who doesn't grow, who catches on and who doesn't catch on. But he went on to law school, and when we went up to law school, he found himself an independent Baptist church, and because he found himself an independent Baptist church, he kept growing, And I mean, I haven't been his pastor in probably 12 years. But he's getting ready to get married, and I just think that's neat. So but that's a lot of boom boom really fast. So just pray. I don't on the way home. I think I think it's Dallas. I don't know. I get to have the worst luck trying to get home sometime, but I don't want to get stuck in Dallas. So just pray I can in and out, and it's no big deal. So any other prayer requests? All right, we'll pray for these. Father, thank you for tonight, and I just thank you for just being able to be in your word. I pray that you'd be with the Awanas tonight, Lord, even though it's break time. Lord, we still get a chance to love on those kids over there and share the word. And Father, I pray that you would be with them this evening. Lord, I pray that you would just watch over them and as we're able to mentor those young people. Lord, I just thank you for the ones that we've been able to see get saved. And Father, I just pray for Scott and his family. Lord, that tomorrow, as they had a funeral for his brother, that you would use him in a way just to show, Lord, your love and your strength. I pray you'd hold that family up, and Lord, just let them know that we love them and we care for them. And I pray you'd give them an extra measure of grace. And Mackenzie and Leanne, Lord, as they're both healing, and that you just watch over them, let them know that we love them. And Lord, I just pray that you would allow me to have safe travel tomorrow and be able to be an influence there. And thank you, Father, for the Bible and being able to open it this evening and learn. I pray that also I want to pray for that missionary that Greg mentioned, Lord, and his wife having to come home and having to fly knowing that your daughter is, needs you and you can't get home really quick. And Lord, I just pray that there would be no obstacles. I'm sure she's got to get a COVID test, so I pray that would go okay and that you just watch over us as they travel back. We love you. We ask this in your precious name. Amen. We're in 2 Corinthians and making some progress. Had a good Bible study on Monday night. We do that at 6 o'clock. If you ever want to come out and be a part of that, we've been going through the book of Revelation, and that's where Jamie said he'd like to be in. We've been having some good discussions over that. We every night when we get into that, it doesn't always have to be the book of Revelation, but it's a good jumping off point. Have a good time of fellowship. Tonight, I believe that we are in chapter 6. We pretty much finished most of chapter 5, so we'll pick it up in chapter 6. Just as a reminder, as we're reading this, just remember this is written to a church. The first one was more of a correction. This one's more of a help. 2 Corinthians chapter 6. We then, as workers together with him, and as I do this, like if I was doing this in my own devotion, I would stop, and you want to get something out of it right away. So the first thing I pick up, Paul's writing this church. He doesn't go to just this church, right? He travels around to lots of different churches, but you look at the wording. It'd be like Brother McBride coming here and say, as workers together. He's identifying the fact that he's working for the Lord. He's busy about serving God, and then he's also identifying the fact that they should be busy serving God, right? So every born-again believer, and that's why that's why God gave us the institution of the church. Remember, a church is a place to serve, right? You can listen to a message anywhere. You can go visit any church. I can go downtown Knoxville, find an independent Baptist church, sit in that church on Sunday, and I can listen to a message, and I can get something out of that message. I can do that at any church, but I couldn't go to that church on Sunday and say, hey, can I teach Sunday school? Because they're going to say, who are you, right? Or I wouldn't go to that pastor and say, hey, I don't know when I'll be back again, but, if you need somebody to go on visitation, let me know. The local church, the reason for that is so you have a place locally to attach yourself to and to serve locally. And everybody ought to look around some place in your church that you can be used to, and even if it's just compiling a prayer list and going to the pastor, which is odd because I'm the pastor, and saying, hey, give me some things to pray for, or you got a list of people that maybe I could call. They're literally, if your heart is, I want to do something, and you go to a pastor and you say, hey, is there anything that I can do? If that pastor has anything, he's never going to say, no, got it covered. Right? Even if he has to find something, that's what a pastor should do, is to help in that area of allowing people to work. We then, as workers together with him, beseech you also that ye receive not the grace of God in vain. We've all been given things that we don't deserve. And a long time ago, I preached a message here. We talked about Samson. Samson was with a woman of ill repute, a prostitute, and that same night, while he was doing something he should not have done, okay, that same night he got up in the middle of the night, realized it was a trap, went out to the gates of the city which were much larger than anything he could move, and he tore the gates of the city down, and he carried them on top of the hill, and he dropped them there. And when you look at that, you think, okay, he was openly disobeying God, but God didn't take him out right then. We know that he shouldn't have touched the dead lion, but he did. But God didn't kill him right then either. It wasn't until, now I want you to really think about this for a second. Why did God what happened to the point where God punished Samson? Where Samson got to a point where God could not use him. See, had he not have cut his hair, when his hair got cut, then that was what his strength was associated with, that obedience and not cutting it. As soon as that was done, he was no longer able to do what God called him to do, and that was to fight the Philistines. And then he got in trouble. But isn't it neat that it didn't happen right away? And everybody in this room, somebody asked me today, well, this happened to me. Does this mean that God's trying to punish me? And I said, listen, if that's the case, nobody in this room would stand. We've all done things that are worthy of God from heaven getting involved in our life and doing something about it. Just because he doesn't mean he doesn't care. It means you're experiencing grace. And here it says that the grace of God should not be in vain. Okay? If you've had a moment in your life where you know we're not doing right, and you dodged a bullet, so to speak, okay, and he was kind to you and he let you put Humpty back together again, then you should respect that grace. You should honor that grace and not let it be in vain. Second chances shouldn't be in vain. Grace shouldn't be in vain. It ought to be respected and said, okay, you could have, but you didn't. And that's what he was saying here, because we've all experienced God's grace in our life. We've all experienced things that where if we got what we deserved, we'd all be in hell. And even if you take hell out of it, God, we've all done things that God should take our jobs for. I mean, we insult him on a regular basis. And he's saying that when God gives us grace, that ought to be a moment in our life where we let that correct us. It doesn't have to be the gavel falling on us. And he says this, so the grace of God is not in vain. For he saith, I have heard thee in the time accepted, and in the day of salvation I have succored thee. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Not only once you're saved, but, lots of times people hear the gospel over and over and over again. God is not entitled to let somebody hear it 100 times, right? I mean, he doesn't have to do it at all. But would there be anything wrong with saying, okay, Randy, you heard the gospel once, you had a chance, you didn't listen to it, that's your fault, I'm moving on? Well, sure. But he let you hear it over again and over. Most everybody in this room went to church several times before you got saved. And what that is, that's the grace of God. And all he's saying here is that should not be. Do you know, I believe God will always speak to a sinner's heart, but do you know you can harden your heart? The more that you put off conviction of the Holy Spirit, whether it's in your life after you get saved or before you get saved, and he speaks to you, the more that you shove that aside, the quieter it is on your end, not his end. Right? You just get used to it. You don't want to get used to that feeling of sitting in a pew and God saying you need to change. If you're not saved, you don't want to get used to that feeling that God says, hey, you need to get saved. You get used to that, and you're used to pushing it off, that's a problem. And he says, don't you just hearing the gospel is God's grace. Even just hearing it is God being gracious to us. It says, giving no offense in anything, that the ministry be not blamed. Now, when you think about that, that's a tall order for anybody. When you look at the qualification for a pastor, it says, basically the same thing, right? That we're to be blameless. That's the word. The problem is, Matt's not blameless. I'm not blameless. No human being is blameless. Yet, when you read that, it says a bishop ought to be blameless. Well, what does that mean? Okay? Because we all have somebody in our scope of influence in our life that could come back and say, well, I know this, or I remember when you this, or I was, okay, so to say that a pastor can, is never going to sin, impossible. To say that a Christian's never going to do that, impossible. When it says blameless, if I did something to you that was wrong, but then I went back to you after that, and I said, I'm sorry, and I repented, and in places where I can make it good, I make it good, and then I no longer have that ought with you, at that moment, that would make me blameless. Because it can't mean not sinning or not having something that somebody can point to, because no human being can be in that bubble. But if I lose my temper, all right, it's here's the thing about a pastor. If you hang around a pastor long enough, sooner or later you're going to realize this about anybody that's in any pulpit. They're just a human being, right? Okay? And sometimes human beings will be human beings. Okay, if you can't, and by the way, same way with other Christians. You know, it's so hard to be around. Sometimes somebody will say, well, I can't believe he did that, or I can't believe they said that, or I can't believe they acted like that. You mean you're actually disappointed that a sinner acts like a sinner. Okay? And remember, you're going to be in that spot at some point where you're going to act like a sinner too, and you're going to also want grace on the other end. Whether it's the guy at the AT&T store or whatever, or some customer service person who's speaking, Spanish and you can't understand them and you get a little impatient. Whatever it is, there's always will be somebody out there that can say, hey, it says giving no offense in anything. You know, that's something we do need to think about, and it ought to be something on our page about our actions, is so that we don't want to give offense. The reason why we should be, and you're going to listen to this list, the reason why we should be patient, the reason why we should turn the other cheek when it's applicable, the reason why we would put ourselves out instead of doing somebody else wrong is because we're wanting to tell them about Jesus. That's why. That's the reason why, right? So if I'm short with them, or I'm impatient with them, or I'm unkind with them, they're going to judge me, but it's going to hurt my ability to witness or to talk to them. They're going to look at Christianity and say, there's no difference. You're just like me. Why do I need to come to church? You know, I mean, the biggest reasons why people don't is they say, well, because church is full of hypocrites. Well, yes, I would say let's be a church that's maybe full of sinners but not hypocritical. And there's a difference. Okay? Be honest about who you are, where you're at. Be kind, and kindness will be given to you when you mess up. Right? You know, the way I explained it about, I may, we'll say speeding. Okay? Speeding's not, it's breaking the law. Okay? You may speed, but if you say, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with speeding, but if you say, okay, I speed and I know I shouldn't, that's a big difference. If you apply that to anywhere in your life, then you're much more able to get grace. But in all things, approving ourselves as the ministers of God. Now remember, he's writing this to the church, so what does that make everybody in that church? A minister of God, right? Because he's writing it to a church. Okay, but in all things, approving ourselves as ministers of God in much patience. All right, so people that belong to God ought to be very patient. We ought to be patient with each other. We ought to be patient with our wives. We ought to be patient with our husbands. We ought to be patient with our kids. We ought to be patient with lost people. Okay, so it says, in much patience, in afflictions. You know, as we go through struggles, that's when the world looks at us, and that's where we're able to show a difference. Lost people and saved people, when it's going good, everybody looks happy. It's when it's not, says, okay, your reaction to that. Why are you reacting that way? Stephen, why aren't you yelling at them because they're stoning you? You know, why are you behaving this way? Why aren't you mad that you got taken advantage of? Why aren't you mad that you lost this? Why aren't you mad that they did this to you? Why aren't you angry about that? Why is it okay with you? How did you find peace? You know, how do you, and that's when we can say, well, because I gave it to the Lord. Well, without affliction, there's no avenue in which to show that. Many of the things that happened in the Old Testament, the things that they went through, was so that God could use that as an opportunity to show everybody around him that he's real. As we go through the storm and the people watch the storm, and they look at that, and then they're saying, okay, how did you get through that? How did you deal with that? And you say, well, because of God and my relationship with him. Okay, so it says, in patience, in afflictions, in necessities, in distress. This is very similar to other verses that we've read where you read the same list and God says through all of these things, we were not knocked down. In stripes, in imprisonments, in tumults, in labors, in watchings, in fastings. Look at verse 5 and 4 at the bottom of 4 and verse 5. He's saying that his life had some difficulties in it. The Apostle Paul, had an incredible relationship with God. He wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. He could actually heal people, but he still had to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. He still had to deal with Alexander the coppersmith. He still had people talk about him. He still had problems working with other Christians. It was still there. Even though he could get a hold of God and had a much greater relationship with him than I do, he still had these things, because it's in these areas that we're able to show who God is. Where else is the difference? Right? And you think, well, why did this happen? Because God is doing something bigger than us. And it's actually an honor to be a part of that if the end goal is, let my light shine. Okay? So somebody ends up in the hospital with cancer, and, they're mad at everybody in the world. And the next guy shows up with cancer, and he says, you know what? God's good. I know where I'm going. I'm saved. I have hope. And he's smiling when he shouldn't be smiling. Okay? And at that moment, the world can look and see there are two different people in front of me. Why? Because one has the Lord, one doesn't have the Lord. Or it could be two Christians. One is accepting that, and it was the same when I was talking to Scott. And he was saying, when you look at this and you think, why would God do this to one person? And it's during that moment that you have a chance to let that light shine, right? Because God's coming in and helping you in areas that you're not going to get through on your own. It goes on, in stripes, imprisonments, and tumults, and labor, and watching, fasting, by pureness, by knowledge. But, pureness, we have to understand that there is something that we can never give up. We cannot start being like the world. You're going to give up your pureness. We can't do that. We can't. There always has to be a due north, right? So that you can find direction. If you muddy the waters too much, if anything goes, guys, there has to be some standards. Okay, there has to be a line in which you can reset anything to. Right? Take music. All right? Obviously there's some songs. When I was a kid, there were some things that I would be embarrassed to tell you I listened to. That shouldn't be something that a Christian listens to. But you can take the Word of God, you can find due north, and you can iron out what you should listen to on your own. And that would go with anything, from dress to actions to what you watch and what you don't watch. Why? Because God is holy and pure, and we're to be like Him. And that's part of that, shining our light for Him, is to, once we start, okay, yes, God's a God of grace. No matter what you do, He's going to forgive you. But some people have an attitude sometimes that as long as you can't get arrested for it, it's not wrong, and that's not what the Bible says, and if we just remove that and say, okay, there's no baseline, well, then we're going to be just like the world. There is a separation between us and them. There are things that God asks us not to do that He doesn't ask them not to do. They don't belong to Him. And being holy and being pure is one of those things that we always want to keep an eye out and keep the world out of our life, by pureness, by knowledge, by staying in the Word of God, by long suffering that goes along with being patient. Long suffering. We should not give up, as Christians, we should not give up on anybody. Why? Well, you don't understand how many times they've done this to me. Okay, why should you not biblically ever give up on you? Why do you not write anybody off as a Christian? If you're a Christian, you've got to build in hope to anybody. Why? Because He builds that in with you. Okay? Because He's long-suffering to you. You can't take something and then not want to give it back out. Okay? Now, just because I don't know about it in your life, or He doesn't know about it in your life, every human being in here can point to the long-suffering of God, the kindness of God in your life, and because you get that on it, do you want that to be available to you tomorrow? You don't want to get hammered the first time you mess up tomorrow? then return long suffering to other people. That doesn't mean you got to let them abuse you. It doesn't mean you got to let them, it doesn't mean you got to facilitate what they're doing. It doesn't mean you got to, turn a blind eye and just be walked all over top of. No, but to the point where you don't ever write somebody off. Because now that you're saved, God's never going to write you off. You can be like the prodigal, and you can end up in a pig pen, and God still isn't going to write you off. Okay? And so long suffering is part of that to show people around us. Let's see here, where'd I go? Okay, in pureness and knowledge, by long suffering, by kindness. When somebody comes into a local church, and I know it's different here because you all know everybody, but when somebody comes into a local church, it's a family, right? Well, if they're not part of the family, have you ever gone to a place where everybody knows everybody, but you're the odd man out? It's a little odd. It's different, right? Okay. Well, people are starting to move in this area. I pick them out pretty quick because they look like me. Right? And you're looking at them and you're thinking, the other day we were at the Mexican place and I pegged two of them right away. I said, "You're not from here, are you?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Neither am I. I'm transplanted too." But if somebody like that, and then they show up and they don't know that 90% of this church is related to somebody, and you already know everything about them, and they sit in a pew by themselves. And then they go out the door, and they do that 100 times. Nobody asks them over for dinner. Nobody says, "Hey." Nobody reaches out to them past that. Yes, they can hear the message. But how do you get them in the family? See, I know all your families are really tight, but this is another family, right? At least on Sunday, we come together and we function as a family. So, it's really important. People already, if they're if they're not from here, they're already going to be a little bit nervous. People don't, well, what do they do? Randy told me this guy messes with snakes at his church. Well, he was just goofing, but I mean, you can imagine saying, what kind of my church am I getting into? And then you sit there, and you're already intimidated. I know down in when I was in Slippery Rock, this was years ago, and at that church, usually on a Sunday morning, everybody wore a tie, and that was just the way it was. And one of the college students walked in a pair of shorts on Sunday morning. He glowed in the dark, man. And I'm thinking, oh no, how is this going to go, right? Well, I can tell you, that was the first year Brian McBride ever preached. After Brian McBride preached, he asked if he could come talk to me. I sat in the parking lot for an hour and a half, got to lead that guy to the Lord. Then he ended up, now, after he got saved, I don't think he ever wore a suit, but he did put pants on the next time he came. I never told him. And I don't know if somebody else told him. And it really wouldn't bother to me. But here's what I wanted him to do. I went and found guys. I said, "Look, okay, short of taking your clothes off, go make him feel like he's not the only one in here wearing shorts. Because it's going to be a long church service." Okay? So whatever you got to do, short of taking your clothes off, go over there and sit by him. And you know what? That kindness paid off. Now, he ended up moving, transferring to college. Before he left, he asked if he could eat dinner with me. I went and ate dinner with him. And he sat down and he said he was crying. He said, "I know why I came here." He said, "I really wanted to get in this college, and I couldn't do it fast enough, but now I can." He said, "I came here because I needed that." And off he went, right? Well, if you'll notice in these things when you talk about it, we've been in 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, we've seen this word kindness a lot, right? And he was telling them in a local church, it just has to be there, okay? Let's see here. Seeing kindness by the Holy Ghost, by love unfeigned, by the word of truth, okay? This is your guideline, right? I told you before, the pastor's authority doesn't, somebody asked me the other day about, can a pastor without kids? Doesn't have kids. Well, the art of parenting doesn't come from me, it comes from this. As long as I use this, if I say, look, I don't even have kids, but I read a really good book that has a lot of good information about how to raise kids, how about I just read you that? Right? And that happens to be the Bible. And as long as you go, now if you try to go to that parent and you don't have kids, you try to go to that parent and say, well, let me tell you something, this is what I think you need to do, you're probably going to get your head handed to you. But as long as you, because they're going to go, well, you don't, yeah, well, as long as you stick with this and you show them this, then you're okay, right? By the way, that goes for anything. Somebody gets, what we don't want them to do is get offended by things that aren't in here. I had a lady in my church that didn't believe in Christmas. Okay, she was Catholic, got saved, didn't want anything to do with Christmas. So I did not put a Christmas tree in the church. And now some people said, well, how come you're not going to put a Christmas tree? Because it's not a necessity. All right? Nobody can show me that we have to have a Christmas tree. Now then somebody will say, well, how far are you going to put it? I said, well, within reason, but I can tell you pretty sure that I feel somewhat comfortable of saying, okay, I can get that, and since I don't want to offend somebody in something that doesn't really matter, we're not going to have a Christmas tree. So we didn't put a Christmas tree. Now, here's what I told her. I said, but if you come to my house, I'm going to have a Christmas tree in my house. I'm not going to take my Christmas tree down in my house because you don't like Christmas trees. I said, so no, if you come to my house during Christmas time, I'm going to have a Christmas tree in my house. I said, however, in the church, that's not a necessity. So I'm not going to just go rub it in somebody's face and say, here, because I want to reach them. Now, if they're asking me to not use a Bible, forget it. If it's without reason to that, because she said, well, I'll see you in a month. And I'm thinking, okay, because you know what? What's the idea? Maybe to help her grow. Okay? I mean, I'm already comfortable. I don't think I'm worshiping. Some people believe they actually have scripture verses that you're bowing down to an idol and whatever. And that's a big deal to them. Well, but I want to help them understand that they need to probably grow in that area, and I can't if I blow it up. Now, if they're going to tell me how to preach, or they're going to turn around and say, well, Mike's got a Christmas tree, I'll say, well, Mike's none of your business. Okay, but I'm not going to do something on purpose, in a church that I know is going to aggravate other people if there's not a reason, a biblical reason to do that. And as time went on, we were able to help in that area. Let's see here. But I was pointing out the truth because, the Bible, even at Slippery Rock, we were King James only. I've only been that way, right? But there were lots of people that came to that church that used all kinds of different Bibles. I told them I'm not going to be the Bible police. I'm going to go down the pew and say, hey, what are you reading? You know why? Because I want to help them, right? And I'm glad they're coming. That's between them and the Lord. Now, for me, this is what I'm going to use. But I'm not going to do it. I always tell people I'm King James, but I'm not King James ignorant. I'm going to use it. There's a reason why I do. But however, I also am going to give grace because that's in their life. And if that's where they feel like they're at, as long as they're not asking me to change, but then we, and you know what, in that church we had we were able to see probably the number one group of people that we were able to see come to the Lord were Presbyterians. But we didn't have a Baptist church on every corner. It was a Presbyterian church on every corner. And as long as it's in the Bible, do you know whether it's, okay, I know some people, I had a friend tell me the one time and say, hey, I'm bringing my uncle to church, he's Catholic. Okay, so what I need to not do that day is, okay, I got a Catholic in the church. I'm going to hit Mary. I'm going to get up there. Do you know what? There's no reason to hit. I can just take the Bible and preach biblical truth and hit Mary without mentioning Mary. Okay? And if you get offended at biblical truth, if I got up there and say, You ever seen one of those? They have them in New Orleans. One of those, on every lawn, they've got this statue. What is it called? A grotto? It's shaped like this, and there's Mary on the inside of it. Well, a lot of preachers would come into our area in New Orleans. They'd get up there and say, hey, I saw Mary on the half shell, because oysters are big down there. And if there is a Catholic person in church that Sunday and you're trying to get them the truth, and you get up there and you make a Mary on the half shell joke, or you say the Pope's the Antichrist, maybe so. But the Bible doesn't say the Pope's the Antichrist, and all you're going to do is unnecessarily, bother somebody that you don't have to. Now, this right here, in this book, if it offends you, tough luck. If it's in this Bible and you don't like it, nicely, there's the door. Okay? But you don't want to do it. That he's saying, hey, listen, we do these things in truth. This is what we stand on. It's not opinions. It's not my ideas. It's Bible. You do that, and you can live to tell the next day. By the word of truth, by the power of God. It's not anything that we do. Preaching is just a story without God. By the armor of righteousness. I like that. What is one of the things that protects us? Living the way God tells us to live. All right, by the armor of righteousness on the right hand and on the left. By honor and dishonor. And he's saying we need to, when it says on the right hand, on the left, what he's saying is focus your eyes on this. Don't get distracted. And he's saying this. Whether people are honoring you or dishonoring you, this is the way you're supposed to act. Whether people are giving you an evil report or people giving you a good report, this is the way you're supposed to act. And it says, as deliverers, as deceivers, and yet true. Some people say, hey, calls you this, and other people say, you're this. He said, no matter what changes, that this is what we're to live by. Whether in good times or in bad times. As sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. Isn't that awesome? Yes, there may be some times in your life where your heart is broken, but don't let it take your joy. All right? As sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. As poor, yet make many rich. He's saying, listen, even if you're struggling, you're really not poor because you're able to then turn around with what you have and make somebody else rich with that. I mean, the Bible changed my life. The Bible changed Randy's life. I am not perfect, but I'm a whole lot better than the way God found me. I've got a checklist, Matt. I want to knock a few more off before I get to heaven. But I promise you, I'm not the way I was. Right? I mean, you wouldn't have liked me. You certainly wouldn't have voted me as your pastor, for sure. Right? What you do see about me isn't me. It's Jesus helping me. Changing my attitude, my thought pattern, what's important, what's not important, how I treat other people, how I don't treat other people. That's his influence inside of you and me that makes the difference. It says, yet making many rich, as having nothing, I love this, as having nothing, yet possessing all things. Man, is that ever a deep thought? How could you have nothing but have everything? Because you have Christ, you have everything. Now, if we could get our kids, our young people to embrace that, they wouldn't go out and see the well-watered plains of Jordan. If they would realize they already have it. Dream big for God and he can write any check. Okay? I mean, ask him to give you a story, he'll give you a story. You already have everything. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and he loves you. He's on your side. He's pulling for you. You have his vote. What more do you want? That's everything. Okay, I can today take my biggest heartache and go to a God that can do anything. And I can tell him about it. And not only tell him about it, but believe he can actually do something about it. And that's with that you can tackle anything. It says, O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open to you, our heart is enlarged. I like that because, again, he has gone way out of his way to show this church he's carrying their burden. Right? Okay? Ye are not straitened by us, but you are straitened in your own bowels. Now for a recompense in the same I speak as unto my children. But ye also are enlarged. I like that, how he put in here, again, letting them know. He says, I speak as unto my children. Be ye not unequally yoked, which is great advice for somebody that cares about it. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers? For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light with darkness? And again, that's not just talking about marriage. You probably shouldn't go in business with somebody who's lost. Why? Because somebody who's lost may not have the same moral compass you do. You know, somebody who's lost may be okay with lying a little bit. You shouldn't be, right? Somebody who's lost, you know, may say, well, you know, it's not the customer first, it's me first. And if you're a Christian, that's going to collide in what you believe, you know. But we shouldn't probably be unequally yoked in what we watch and what we listen to and the things that we do. You know, we should not form a relationship with something that's against God or somebody that doesn't like God. All right, you should draw the line there and say, you know, that's the point I can't get involved in, because we have to break fellowship. At what point would you break fellowship with the world? At what point do you say, you don't like my father? You know, everybody in here that has kids can get parent syndrome really quick. And Jordan, you're a teacher. Have you ever had to go tell somebody their kid did something wrong in school and it not go really well? They don't like to hear that. I don't like to hear it as a parent either. It's very difficult to take something objectively when you love the object on the other end more than life itself. To some points, the point where maybe you should listen and you don't. If we're like that with our own kids, how much more should we be with God? And why do we feel comfortable having anything to do with any entity that doesn't like my Father? You see, that's the reason why that's the reason why you should be unequally yoked, is because you don't like who I love. And you don't respect who I would give my life for. So therefore, we can only go so far in this relationship, because past that it becomes offensive to me, because you're being offensive to him. And that's the point where that's a no-go in fellowship, right? So, I mean, if you marry somebody who's not saved and they don't even want to pray or go to church, that's going to be a really big problem for somebody who should want to pray and go to church. And God's going to say, well, why in the world did you do that? You know, why would you link your life with somebody that doesn't like me? Okay? You know, and doesn't care about me. So that there's going to be a problem. If you care about me, then that's going to cause you problems with them, because they don't do that, right? And so that's why he's and by the way, who's he telling this to? To Christians. Okay, not saying that to unsaved people. And he goes on, and we've read those before. What communion hath light with darkness, and what concord hath Christ with Belial, or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And those are all very true statements. It should be as, you know, as day and night. And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. So God does not hang out in a tabernacle behind a curtain. He lives in your heart. And you're the temple. So, and this is something I don't know if we really, I don't know if I really grasp it. Do you understand? This is not, when you got saved, you were a slave to sin. Somebody bought you off the auction block. and now you belong to them. When you accepted the payment for your sin, you were accepting new ownership. Before you got saved, the devil owned you. After you got saved, God owns you. You're not your own. Okay? And out of gratitude for what you've been given, he gets first dibs on your life, on your time, on your talents, on your abilities. Because, well, you know, what if a Christian said this? Wait a minute. If I said, hey, Greg, can I use that? Well, he would say, well, that doesn't, if it was mine, you could have it, but it's not. It belongs to somebody else. Let me ask them. Wouldn't that be awesome if somebody says, hey, can you do this? Say, well, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to God. Let me ask them. Should I do this? I mean, you know, there's some things I'm not going to be able to do because I don't belong to me. I belong to him. And when he says that we're the temple was a big thing. You didn't go in there and desecrate the temple. You didn't go in there and you do your own thing in the temple. When you went to the temple, you treated it like this is the temple. It's the reason why you don't want to abuse it. And, you know, there are so many different things, you know, that you can put to that. That's why you take care of it. I was talking to Greg one time about swearing or any kind of vice that's in the world. Now, you know, can you corrupt communications? Well, what is that? It doesn't list a list of words I can't say, right? You know, so you can stretch that to whatever you want to. But even the world today knows what's a vice. They have an idea what bad language is. And they also know things that are addictive and things that they look down as weaknesses even among people who are not saved. And I was talking to Greg and he said his dad told him never give anybody a chance to exploit a weakness in you that could be used against your testimony. And that's a good thought. That's what it comes down to, saying this is a temple that belongs to God. And have I desecrated this temple? Well, sure. And I can tell you, the only reason why anybody in this room would be dumb enough to do that is at that moment we take our mind off of that thought. Because that would be silly, because I'm going to have to give an account of that, right? So why would you put yourself through that? Because at that moment I'm not thinking about that. Afterwards you're thinking, well, that just made Judgment Day going to be a little longer. But if I thought about it and saw, wait a minute, this house doesn't belong to me. God's living inside of it, right? Let me just get to the last one and we'll be done. And then it says, wherefore come out from among them and be as separate. Remember that he had to go to this church because there were some things in the church that just shouldn't be. He since helped them with that, and here's what he says. Wherefore come out from among them. Among who? Among the world that he just mentioned. He said, come out from among them. All right? You know, let people know there's a difference in us. Wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. Do you think that a lost person, how long should a lost person... Okay, for instance, you know, we can discuss, I got 5 minutes, we'll be done. We can discuss tattoos all day long. Should you have them, should you not have them? In the Bible, if you're going to build a biblical principle to that, you really only got one good verse. That talks about marking your body for the dead. As soon as I go to somebody that has a tattoo, they're going to say, I didn't mark my body for the dead. It's just my daughter's name. She's alive. Okay. All right. So, okay. So you really can't go and say, all right, you're going to go to hell because you got a tattoo. But what if now, I get it that you'd give me grace if I did it before salvation. But what if next week I get a whole sleeve? I put John 3:16 and another bunch of really great verses on my arm, right? Because I just want people to see the truth. Now, at that moment, whether you like them or not, you're probably not going to want your pastor after getting saved to go out and get a full sleeve tattoo, right? Why? Because from a distance, we want them to be able to tell there is something different about us. Now, if you got it, then you got it. But to just go do it after I'm trying to, because where does the separation happen? It says separate. Well, where does that come from? Where do you separate? Where's the line? Just separate from them, come out from among them, and be ye separate. Don't do what they do. Don't act like they act. Okay? Because you are different. Again, it's not the end of the world that you have a tattoo. It's that, okay, but if, now, maybe 100 years, there's no difference. I know when I was a kid, you're either in the military, those were the ones that would normally have them. So do we want the next generation of Christian Sunday school kids, everybody, that's 30 years old, have full body? I mean, where do you draw the line, is that okay one day? Well, why wouldn't it be okay one day? Because there's still an element when people look at that, they think a little bit more about the world than they do with the Lord, and it's not going to kill you just to leave it out. It may muddy the waters if you put it on, but it won't hurt you to leave it off at all. It's a good, safe line. You're not talking about telling somebody they can't eat. You're not talking and telling somebody you can't drink. You're just talking to somebody telling you that's God's temple, and just be careful with it because it represents Him. That's all. Now, I couldn't go to you and say, Ron's a deacon, and Ron goes out and gets a tattoo tomorrow. I can't say you got to quit being a deacon, because I have no scriptural basis to say that's a sin. All right? But, if you got them all over him, you're going to be like, hey, did you used to be a biker or something? Well, what's your story? But I couldn't tell him, hey, you can't do that. But if it muddies the water at all, and I know I'm supposed to come out from among them and be separate, and I'm God's temple, well, then we're going to want to steer away from that stuff. We're going to want to come over here because you're not. Remember this. Titus had an argument. Had a guy one time who wanted to teach Sunday school. Now, the church I was at before was probably a little bit more conservative, and I had people in my church, necklaces on guys, no. I mean, bad no. Well, this guy wanted to teach Sunday school. He had a necklace. And I'm like, look, you got to take the necklace off. Show me in the Bible. I said, I can't. I can just tell you this. You're going to blow my day up. Okay? I said, I'm going to have, and then there will be people that aren't going to come to your class, and all I did was look at them and say this. Can you tell me it's worth it? If it's worth it, then I'll leave it alone. But could you just stick it inside your shirt for me? Would it kill you to do that? So that we're not unnecessarily creating issues we don't have to create? Okay? And all I would tell somebody if they were say, listen, Ron, do you really have to get the tattoo? Can you just maybe get a yard sign or, put a bumper sticker on your car? Do you really, Ron, there's so many, is that really that important when it may lead, and that's where his dad came in. Why give something to somebody that they could use possibly against your testimony if you don't have to do it, right? And that's really good wisdom when it says come out from, because how else are you going to tell them? What do you tell? What do you tell if your grandkids come to you and say, hey, I want to get, I want to get a Bible verse on my back. Some of the reasons are really good reasons, but then again, we're then getting into muddy water, and we want the light to shine. And me, I know I got areas I could work on, right? I would be very hypocritical to tell you that I don't. The idea is to listen to the wisdom here and take that away and go, okay, what better can I do to help protect these areas? All right, Brother Andy, lead us in prayer.